Thanksgiving Day arrived, and the house was buzzing with activity. The sweet smell of turkey and pumpkin pie filled the air as family members milled about, catching up on the year's events. The kids ran through the hallways, their laughter echoing through the walls. Everything seemed picture-perfect, just as it had in years past. But beneath the holiday cheer, there was an unspoken tension simmering under the surface. It wasn't the kind of tension you could easily identify. It was subtle, lurking just below the surface, like a storm waiting to break. I tried to push the feeling aside, telling myself it was just the stress of the holidays. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was the weight of everything I had been dealing with, the constant financial strain of helping my sister, the unspoken tension between my brother and me, and the silent expectations that seemed to grow every year. As I stood in the kitchen, arranging the side dishes on the table, I couldn't shake the feeling that this Thanksgiving was going to be different from all the others. It started with the conversation about money, as it always did. The topic seemed harmless at first, just a casual mention of bills and expenses, but it quickly spiraled into something much more intense. My brother, always the pragmatic one, had always been skeptical of my decision to help my sister with her debt. He would often make little comments here and there, passive-aggressive remarks about enabling her, but this time, there was no subtlety. There were no more polite suggestions or gentle digs. It all came to a head when he finally blurted out, "Stop asking for money." I froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. It wasn't just about the money. It was about everything: the years of financial support, the countless hours spent listening to my sister's struggles, the constant pressure I felt to help, but most of all, it was about my relationship with my brother. That one statement shattered any remaining illusion of harmony. The room fell silent, and everyone paused, looking from one face to another, unsure of what to do next. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to defend myself, to explain why I had been helping my sister, but the words wouldn't come. The anger and hurt swirled inside me, but I couldn't find a way to express it without escalating things further. I felt trapped between two worlds: on one side, the family I loved, and on the other, the financial burden I had taken on, trying to save my sister from the overwhelming weight of her debt. The silence lingered, and for a brief moment, I wished I could just leave, run away from the tension, and pretend none of it was happening. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I had sacrificed so much: my time, my money, my peace of mind, and yet it never seemed to be enough. The reality of it hit me hard. My brother's words stung not just because of their directness, but because they represented everything I had been avoiding. The truth was, I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this. I looked around the room, at my sister sitting there quietly, avoiding eye contact, and at my brother, whose face was a mixture of frustration and resignation. It was clear he didn't understand why I had chosen to keep helping her. To him, it seemed like a never-ending cycle of enabling bad behavior. He believed I was doing more harm than good by constantly bailing her out, but he couldn't see the bigger picture. He couldn't understand the guilt that weighed on me, the sense of responsibility I felt for her future. As I stood there, the weight of it all became too much to bear. My mind raced through the years of financial struggles, the many late-night phone calls with my sister, her apologies, and promises to change. But none of that seemed to matter now. What mattered was this moment, this rupture in our family dynamic that felt like a turning point. The question was, how would I respond? How could I continue to help her without losing myself in the process? My brother's words had echoed in my mind long after they were spoken. I tried to dismiss them, telling myself it was just frustration talking, that he didn't really mean it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. His words were a reflection of his growing resentment for my sister's behavior, and, more pointedly, for my role in enabling her. I had been blind to how my actions were affecting not only my own life but also my relationship with him. As I sat down at the table, trying to act normal, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. He was right in some ways. I had been so focused on helping my sister, on rescuing her from the mess she had made, that I had neglected my own well-being. My finances were a mess. I had drained my savings account and postponed my own plans to help her pay off her $52,800 credit card debt. And yet, I had never asked for anything in return. Not once. My brother, on the other hand, had always been more practical, more focused on self-sufficiency. He believed in tough love, in letting people face the consequences of their actions. But I had never been able to take that approach with my sister. She was family. She was my responsibility. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the money. It was about the cycle I had been trapped in for years. My sister had become dependent on me, and I had let it happen. At first, it felt good to help to be the one who could make things better, who could solve her problems. But over time, it became exhausting. I had spent so many nights awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my help was doing more harm than good. Was I enabling her? Was I teaching her to take responsibility for her actions? Or was I simply making her feel like she could keep making the same mistakes, knowing I'd always be there to pick up the pieces? I thought back to the early days, when she first confided in me about her mounting debt. I had promised her I'd help, that I would do whatever it took to get her back on track. But what I hadn't realized at the time was that I was setting a dangerous precedent. Every payment I made, every late-night phone call offering advice and support, was reinforcing the idea that she didn't have to face the consequences of her actions. She could just rely on me, and now, after all these years, the consequences were hitting me harder than I ever expected. The emotional weight of my brother's words, the pressure of my sister's debt, and the strain on my own finances were starting to take their toll. My patience was running thin, and I couldn't keep up this charade any longer. I had to make a choice. I looked at my brother, who was sitting across from me, his eyes full of frustration. For the first time in a long while, I saw the anger in his eyes, not just at my sister, but at me. He had always been the one to keep things grounded, to remind us of our limits. But in my desperation to help, I had ignored those limits. I had ignored the signs that I was losing myself in the process. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for my glass of water. My brother's words rang in my ears. "Stop asking for money." I had heard them loud and clear, but what I hadn't yet figured out was how to respond. Could I keep helping my sister, or was it time to step back? Was I doing more harm than good by continuing down this path? The family chatter around me faded as my thoughts consumed me. I needed time to think. I needed to figure out a way to balance my love for my sister with the reality of my own life. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I knew I couldn't keep sacrificing everything for her. But could I truly walk away? Could I let her fall without my safety net? The tension in the room felt suffocating, and I knew this wasn't just about Thanksgiving anymore. This was about my future, my family's future, and my ability to set boundaries before it was too late. My next move would define everything: my relationship with my sister, with my brother, and with myself. As the evening progressed, the weight of the conversation hung heavily in the air. The dinner that had started with laughter and light-hearted conversation now felt like a distant memory. I couldn't focus on the food or the casual chatter around the table. My mind was racing, torn between the desire to fix things and the realization that I couldn't keep carrying this burden alone. I had been the one to hold my family together, but what had it cost me? What had I sacrificed in the name of family loyalty? I kept replaying the words my brother had said in my mind. "Stop asking for money." It wasn't just a statement. It felt like a condemnation, a judgment of everything I had done to help my sister. In his eyes, I had failed to teach her the value of responsibility, failed to hold her accountable. And maybe he was right. Maybe I had been too soft, too quick to jump in and bail her out every time she got herself into trouble. The thought of it made my stomach turn. But then, there was the other side of the story, the side that my brother couldn't see. My sister had always been my responsibility. Even from a young age, she was the one who always needed extra care, extra attention, and I had never minded. I had always been the protector, the one who made sure she didn't fall too far, who swooped in when things got tough. It felt natural to help her. But now, after years of shouldering the weight of her financial mistakes, I wasn't sure if it was love or something else entirely that kept me going. Was I truly helping her, or was I enabling her to stay stuck in a cycle of financial chaos? The deeper question was, why had I allowed myself to be trapped in this role for so long? Why did I keep giving, even when it hurt? Was it because I couldn't bear the thought of her failing? Or because I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped helping? I realized I had never really considered the consequences of my own actions, how it affected my life, my savings, and even my emotional well-being. I had been so focused on her, on rescuing her from herself, that I had neglected my own needs. I turned to look at my sister, who was sitting quietly across the table. She had been silent for most of the evening, her eyes downcast, as though she too felt the tension but didn't know how to address it. I wondered if she even understood the toll this was taking on me. Did she realize how much I had given up to help her? Did she appreciate the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the constant stress of watching her spiral deeper into debt? At that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't about paying off her debts or keeping her afloat. It was about breaking the cycle. I had to stop being the one to fix everything, the one to always save the day. I had to make her see that she couldn't rely on me forever. And, more importantly, I had to make myself understand that I didn't need to carry this burden on my own. I excused myself from the table, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. I walked outside, the cool night air hitting my face as I tried to clear my head. The sound of my family inside, laughing and talking, felt distant. It felt as though I was standing on the outside, looking in at a life that no longer felt familiar. I had been so focused on making everyone else's life better that I had lost sight of my own happiness. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my racing thoughts. The answer was clear: I had to set boundaries. I had to stop enabling my sister's behavior, even if it meant risking her anger or disappointment. I had to let her face the consequences of her actions, but, at the same time, I needed to offer her the tools to help herself. It wasn't about cutting her off completely, but about teaching her how to stand on her own 2 feet. As I stood there in the quiet of the night, I realized that setting boundaries wasn't just about my sister, it was about me. It was about protecting my own mental health and financial stability. It was about realizing that I couldn't be the savior for everyone, and that was okay. I had to start taking care of myself, too. I knew the next time I saw my sister, the conversation would be hard, but it was a conversation that had to happen, for both of our sakes. The next morning, things were quieter. The usual post-Thanksgiving chaos of cleaning up and packing up leftovers was happening, but it felt different. The tension from the night before hadn't lifted. If anything, it had settled deeper into the walls of the house. My brother had already left, his goodbye terse, and I knew our relationship would be different from now on. He had said what he needed to say, and I couldn't undo that. But what bothered me the most was how the rest of the family seemed to avoid the elephant in the room. My sister had said little since the dinner, offering weak smiles but not making eye contact. She seemed lost in her own thoughts, which only added to the silence that hung between us. I knew I couldn't just let things go on like this, pretending everything was fine. The stakes were too high, and I had spent too many years putting my own life on hold for the sake of family loyalty. I had always been the one who made things better, who offered solutions, but now, I was starting to realize that I wasn't the one who needed fixing, at least not in the way I had thought. Sitting alone in my room, I pulled up my financial records. The numbers on the page didn't lie. I had paid off nearly half of my sister's $52,800 credit card debt over the last 2 years. But in doing so, I had emptied my savings, deferred my own goals, and put my own financial stability at risk. Looking at the numbers felt like a gut punch. I had been so consumed with helping her that I had lost sight of my own goals, my own future. It was time for a change. I couldn't keep sacrificing my financial well-being for her mistakes. No matter how much I loved her, she needed to face the consequences of her own actions. I knew it was harsh, but it was the only way she would truly learn. I called her later that day, asking if we could sit down and talk. I could hear the hesitation in her voice as she agreed, and I could tell she knew something was coming. As we sat down in the living room, the same place where the Thanksgiving confrontation had taken place, I looked at her, trying to find the right words. My heart was heavy, knowing how much this would hurt her, but I had to do it. I couldn't keep enabling her. "Listen," I started, trying to steady my voice. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I realize that I've been doing you a disservice by continuing to bail you out. I can't keep doing it. You have to start taking responsibility for your own finances. I can't fix this for you anymore." Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I thought she might cry. I almost regretted it, almost took back the words. But I knew I couldn't. I couldn't let my fear of her disappointment dictate my actions any longer. This was the right thing, even if it was the hardest thing. "I know you've been helping me," she said quietly, her voice trembling. I don't know how to get out of this. I don't want to disappoint you, but I feel stuck." The vulnerability in her voice made my heart ache, but I couldn't let that sway me. "I know it's not easy, but you have to learn how to manage this yourself. I can't keep carrying this for you. I'll always be here for you, but I can't keep paying off your debt. You have to start taking charge of your own life." It was a long conversation, filled with tears and anger, but in the end, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time: determination. Maybe she didn't fully understand the depth of what I was saying, but I could tell that she was starting to realize the weight of the situation. She wasn't as angry as I feared she would be, but I could see that she felt the sting of what I had said. I wasn't the safety net anymore, and that was something she had to come to terms with. As she left the room, there was a sense of finality in the air. I had said what needed to be said, and it wasn't easy. I felt a mixture of relief and guilt, but deep down, I knew this was the right step for both of us. She needed to learn how to stand on her own, and I needed to start taking care of myself again. the conversation with my brother still lingered in my mind. Though, his anger was justified. But I wasn't sure if he understood why I had been doing what I did. Maybe he never would. Maybe we would never see eye to eye on this, but at least I had taken the first step toward fixing things, toward setting boundaries that I could live with. The days following the conversation with my sister were a blur. There was an uneasy quiet between us, a lingering tension that neither of us knew how to ease. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to pick up the phone and offer advice, or call her to check if she was keeping up with her payments. It felt strange, as though a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but also as if I had just stepped into uncharted territory. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the financial sacrifice, it was the emotional toll. For so long, I had defined my role in the family as the one who stepped in when things went wrong, the fixer, the safety net, but now that I had set that boundary, I felt a mix of fear and relief. Fear of how my sister might react in the long term, and relief that I no longer had to carry that burden. It wasn't just the financial aspect that had been draining, it was the guilt, the constant feeling that I was doing something wrong by not helping her more. I had become so wrapped up in her struggles that I had neglected my own life, my own dreams, and my own well-being. I hadn't realized just how much I had lost myself in the process. Over the next week, I noticed subtle changes in my sister. At first, she seemed distant, almost resentful. She hadn't called or reached out to talk, and the guilt crept back in. Had I done the right thing? Was she upset with me? But then, something shifted. One evening, she called me not to ask for money, but to ask for advice. She was working on a budget plan for the first time, taking responsibility for her debts, and I could sense a new resolve in her voice. "I've been thinking about everything you said," she told me. "It's hard, but I'm going to try and fix this myself. I don't want to keep depending on you." Hearing those words felt like a small victory. It wasn't just about the money. It was about her willingness to change, to take charge of her life. I could hear the determination in her voice, and that was all I needed to know that I had made the right choice. But it wasn't going to be easy. She was still at the beginning of a long and difficult journey. But for the first time in a long time, I believed she could do it. The hardest part of the process wasn't over yet. There would be setbacks, and there would be moments when I would question my decision. But I had set the boundary, and now it was time to let her figure things out for herself. I had to trust her, even when it was difficult, and even when I wanted to swoop in and fix everything. A few weeks later, my brother reached out to me. We hadn't spoken much since Thanksgiving, and there was a noticeable awkwardness in our conversation, but he was the first to acknowledge the tension. "I know things have been tense," he said, his voice softer than I expected, "but I've been thinking about it. Maybe I was too harsh. You were just trying to help." His apology, though unexpected, meant more than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about him admitting he was wrong, it was about understanding the complexity of the situation. For the first time, I felt like he saw things from my perspective. Maybe he didn't fully agree with my choices, but he respected them. I knew things wouldn't go back to how they were before. Things rarely do, after a confrontation like that, but it felt like a step toward healing. I had taken a hard stance, and while it wasn't easy, it was necessary. For the first time in a long time, I was starting to think about myself, about what I wanted, and what I needed. I wasn't just the person everyone turned to for help. I was allowed to have my own life too. The road ahead wasn't going to be smooth. There would be bumps, and there would be moments when I doubted my decision, but I knew I had made the right choice for me and for my family. Setting boundaries wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about giving my sister the chance to grow and take responsibility for her own life. It was about rebuilding trust, both within myself and within my family. As for my sister, I knew she wasn't out of the woods yet. The journey to financial independence wouldn't happen overnight, but I had to trust that she would get there, and I had to trust that, in time, she would understand why I had to take a step back. I had done all I could for her, and now it was her turn to take the reins. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The awkwardness between my brother and me slowly faded, replaced by a cautious understanding. We didn't have deep conversations, but there was no longer a wall between us. It felt like we were moving forward, however slowly. But there was still the matter of my sister. She had taken the first steps toward managing her finances. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't entirely out of the woods. I had given her the tools, but I couldn't make her use them. One evening, she called again, this time with a different tone. It wasn't the desperate plea for help that I had grown so accustomed to. Instead, there was a quiet pride in her voice. She had set up a payment plan for her credit card debt, negotiated lower interest rates, and even set up a savings account. She told me she had started looking for a second job to help pay off the remaining balance faster. I know it's going to take time, she admitted, but I feel like I'm finally in control. And I owe that to you, for making me face it. I don't think I would have done any of this on my own. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had done something right. Not by giving her money, but by giving her the space to figure things out for herself. It wasn't easy for me, and it definitely wasn't easy for her, but it was the right thing. I had to let go, and she had to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. But even as I felt a sense of relief, a part of me was still anxious. What if she faltered again? What if this newfound sense of responsibility didn't stick? It was hard not to worry. I had spent so many years as her safety net, but now, there was no safety net. It was a terrifying feeling, not just for her, but for me. What would happen if she failed? As the months went by, the situation began to improve. My sister continued making payments, and though there were some setbacks, she stuck to her plan. I didn't need to be her lifeline anymore, but I was there when she needed advice or encouragement. It felt like a delicate balance, being supportive without overstepping. I had to remind myself not to fall back into the old patterns of rescuing her. I couldn't be the one to fix everything anymore. She had to do that for herself. The real test came when she called me one evening. Not with a question about her finances, but to tell me about a breakthrough moment. She had finally paid off the last of her credit card debt, and she was planning to take a financial literacy class to learn more about managing money. "I'm doing this for myself now," she told me, her voice filled with pride. "I'm not depending on anyone anymore, not even you." That was the moment I knew she had changed. The sense of independence in her voice was something I hadn't heard before. It was a small victory, but it was the one that mattered the most. I had always wanted to help her, but now, I could see that she had taken the first real steps toward taking control of her own life. The road ahead wasn't going to be perfect. There would be moments of doubt, moments where we would both slip back into old habits. But the difference now was that we both knew how to handle it. I had set the boundary, and she had learned how to manage her own finances. We were both different people now, and though the process had been difficult, I could finally see that it had been worth it. As I looked back on everything, I realized that I had learned as much as my sister had. I had learned that helping someone doesn't always mean rescuing them. Sometimes, it means giving them the space to fail and to grow. It means stepping back and letting them figure things out on their own. And most importantly, it means taking care of yourself first. Because if you don't, you won't have anything left to give. Let me know if you'd like me to continue further. The months that followed were marked by a quiet peace. The tension that had once felt like a permanent weight in my chest had lifted. My sister's financial progress was slow but steady. She wasn't perfect, and there were times when I could tell she still struggled with her old habits. But she was genuinely trying. I was proud of her, but I was also proud of myself. I had made the hardest decision of my life by setting that boundary, and though it had been uncomfortable, it had led to growth for both of us. As for my brother, our relationship continued to evolve. He and I didn't always agree, but we had come to a place of mutual respect. I had learned to see his perspective more clearly, and he had begun to understand why I had done what I did. We still had our differences, but there was a sense of understanding now that hadn't existed before. We could talk openly without the weight of judgment hanging over us. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust. Trust that my sister could handle her own life. Trust that my brother could see the bigger picture. And trust that I could finally start putting myself first. I hadn't realized how much I had neglected my own happiness in the name of family until I started taking steps to rebuild my own life. I wasn't just helping my sister, I was learning how to help myself. One day, a few months after our big conversation, my sister called me again. This time, it wasn't about finances, and it wasn't to ask for advice. She just wanted to catch up, to share a moment of her life with me. We talked about everything: work, friends, future plans. It felt like a normal conversation between siblings, not one overshadowed by debt, guilt, or financial strain. It was the kind of conversation I had been craving for years. It was a sign that we were finally moving forward, not just in terms of money, but in terms of our relationship. "You know," she said casually, "I'm actually thinking of going back to school. I want to learn more about personal finance. I want to be in control of my future, not just financially, but in every way." That moment was a milestone. It wasn't just about paying off debt anymore. It was about her wanting to take control of her life in a way that wasn't tied to me or to anyone else. It was a choice she was making for herself, and I was no longer the one carrying her. She had learned how to walk on her own. The whole process had been a roller coaster of emotions. And there were still times when I felt the pull to step back in and help her more, but I had learned to trust that she would ask for help when she truly needed it. Not out of desperation, but out of a genuine desire to improve. I had also learned to trust that I didn't have to be the one to fix everything, and with that realization, I began to rebuild my own life in ways I hadn't allowed myself before. I started focusing on my own financial goals again. I picked up hobbies that I had put on hold, spent more time with friends, and started planning for my own future. One evening, as I sat down to reflect on everything, I realized just how far we had all come. My sister, who had once been drowning in debt, was now standing on her own feet, making strides toward financial independence. My brother, who had once been angry and frustrated, had found his own way to reconcile his feelings. And me, I had learned how to set boundaries, how to protect myself, and how to trust that the people I loved could handle their own challenges without me constantly stepping in. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I had learned valuable lessons about family, responsibility, and the importance of self-care. I had realized that love doesn't always mean sacrifice. Sometimes, love means giving people the space to grow, even if it's uncomfortable. And while we all still had our struggles, our relationships were stronger for it. We had learned how to face our problems without relying on each other to solve them. And in the end, that was the greatest gift I could give.